So can democracy promoters create a democracy-friendly culture, and how? Well, here's some possible answers to this. First of all, cultures are malleable. There's evidence from around the world that suggests that presumed long-held cultures of authoritarianism, for example, can relatively quickly be changed by a few decades of economic growth or the diffusion of ideas from abroad. So there are ways to change culture over decades, not over centuries. An increase in education, for example, changes political attitudes. It makes people more committed to democracy, to participation. So you find in more educated societies greater support for democracy and their own participation. You can also increase the appeal of democracy for in places where it's not necessarily appealing. Democratization needs to be maybe more concrete. Now it's maybe too abstract. There's not enough attention to concretes like corruption, state and bureaucratic efficacy, respect for minorities, eliminating severe inequalities. So by relating the economic and social rights back to political rights, perhaps this is another way that you can increase the appeal for democracy in countries that have, in societies that have political cultures that are more tailored or apparently more tailored to something else. And again, I mean the survival cultures that we talked about, the traditional political cultures. You can also update religious conceptions. So you emphasize an informal adherence to principles of morality and a commitment to universal values. Another element here is to emphasize the rule of law. Rules being quite common and accepted, as well as historically desired by masses. You can even show the rule of law is conceptually crisper than, for example, Sharia. You could say, hey, in Islamic states, you could say, look at Sharia law, and now look at these new laws that you can develop in democracies that are much more pinpointed. They're more easily operationalized. They're more easily monitored and enforced. Economic growth is another point here. This is the visible sign of modernization. Connect it to democracy, and people are going to see that democracy works. If democracy works, to the extent that it works. In my notes, I've got a big ha written here. But this is a way democracy promoters can actually pursue the change of political culture. Another element here, democracy and secularism. Show democracy doesn't necessarily mean secularism. This is something promoted by non-democratic incumbents, secularism versus a religious attachment. Falali, if you read that reading, cites this contradiction. There's this opposition by masses in some Islamic states to secularism, but there's this state-led secularization across most of the Muslim states. And why is that? Well, if you think about it, it's logical, because the secular leaders feel that they're challenged by religious leaders, and so they pursue this secularization. But democracy doesn't have to mean secularization. Show that democracy can fit in with notions of collectivism. It has to be constructed in ways that allow communal autonomy, where guarantees for nationally accepted principles of justice and fairness are held up too. Look for the lowest common denominator. So democracy doesn't undermine values. It doesn't split communities. It doesn't weaken norms of accommodation. These are all ways that you can help to bring democracy and push a new democratic political culture without waiting generations and generations. So I'll stop there because I don't know if I'm going to keep that up for very long.